I'm Song Richardson. I'm 53 years old, and I'm the Dean of the University of California, Irvine School of Law. I was born in El Paso, Texas, as the daughter of a military family. My father was African American. He passed away a few years ago, and he was a lieutenant colonel in the U.S. Army. He met my mom in Seoul when he was stationed there, and I was their first child. I have two younger brothers and spent most of my life growing up on Army bases, which for me was the best childhood ever. We all grew up with a very strong Korean mom who ran my household like she was a member of the military. And we all play instruments. I play the piano. My two brothers play the violin and the cello. We had a trio. We studied very hard because we never had an option to do anything but be as successful as we could be. As I think about the childhood that I had on Army bases, the reason I loved it so much is it was an incredibly diverse environment. So I learned later when I went to college that being Black and Korean was something that people cared about, commented on, were trying to figure out who I was, what I was, trying to put me in a sort of box, which now I realize is the thing that caused me to study and do the research that I do. But as a child, my best friend was also Black and Korean. All the kids were mixed. So despite the difficulties that my parents faced being a mixed race couple, for me as a child, they shielded me from that. And so I just grew up in a very idyllic environment. And I feel very lucky to have had that. I realized later, not so much because they shared it with me explicitly, but because I thought back on the experience that I had growing up. So when we were all kids, we drove cross-country from one military base to another. And as we were driving cross-country, I remember my mom making all the food, packing everything up, so we could have picnics along the way. And I also remember that we never stopped at any rest stops. Instead, my family, and I thought everyone did this, my family had a coffee can, like literally a coffee can, and we would stop along the side of the road, we would eat, we would use the coffee can as our bathroom. I tell that story because I think it's really important, because I grew up with that memory, but I thought everyone did that. And it was only later that I realized, because I experienced it myself when I'm in a strange place, I realized it wasn't safe they didn't feel safe just stopping in a random place because they didn't know whether they would be accepted or not, what might happen to them, what might happen to us. And I understand that now because my husband, who's so different from me, he's also white, grew up in a farm in Ohio. And when we're driving to go to his home and we're driving through cornfields in the middle of nowhere and he wants to stop, I don't. It's little things like that that slowly have a different meaning for me as I learn more about race and ethnicity and our society. I am so impressed by my mom and my dad, because my mom, can you imagine? She grew up in Korea. She was going to have an arranged marriage with that her family had set up, and she didn't want to do it because the individual to whom she was supposed to marry was a very wealthy individual, but kind of darker skinned. And she didn't want to marry someone who was darker skinned. And then she marries my African American dad. It's so interesting to me that she grew up in a place where she totally rejected darker skin. And then she fell in love with an American, that's bad enough, right? An officer in the military, that's bad enough. And then an African-American person. So her family completely, disowned her. So to this day, and I wish he were around right now, because the only real way that I know what his life must have been like, because he would never talk about what he went through during the Jim Crow era, during, explicit segregation. That's where he grew up, an army that was segregated at first. So for him to become an officer in the military is incredible. And as I look through his photos of when he was growing up in Ohio, what I see is in so many different photos, especially in college, he is the only Black person in a sea of white. Only, right? In every single club, in the ROTC, which was the precursor to him joining the military as an officer, he was the only one. And I really wonder sometimes what that was like for him, because he wouldn't talk about it. And that's how I know how difficult it was for him. It used to be so frustrating for us, my brothers and I, when we would want to drive to the airport and we were running late. And he would not speed. He wouldn't go 1 mile over the speed limit. Like, why? Like, it's ridiculous. And then I realized he's afraid of getting stopped and pulled over by the police, right? As a Black man driving, you have to follow every rule, because even when you do that, you get pulled over. So he was not ever going to break the rules. And I understand him so differently now, because he was always like that. Stay within the lines, follow all the rules, do the right thing. And my mom was like that too, right? So, but he was like that for different reasons, because of the way that he had grown up in the society that we lived in. I felt very much a part of the Korean community. That was my identity. That's where I felt the most comfortable, because my father's family wasn't really around. So the painful part of it, that process in college of figuring out what my identity was and how the rest of the world understood that, it was obvious to me from the very beginning that the Korean Student Association and that the Koreans on campus, I was not a part of them. For me, at least I get emotional even just thinking about it. For me personally, like, that's the community that I identify with. Even though I don't speak the language, but that's, I grew up that way. My mom raised me like a Korean girl. Like, that's how I grew up. And so that part was painful. And then with the African American community and the Black students, because I never grew up thinking about hanging out with this group versus that group, because it was always just about who you were, not what you were. And I never felt like I needed that kind of support, because I didn't grow up in that. It's all different now, but at that point, I didn't feel that. So one of the first things that happened with the Black Student Association was they had a meeting that another Black friend of mine told me about later. They had a meeting about me and another woman who was mixed race. She was Black and white. And neither of us were members of the Black Students Association, because it just didn't occur to me to be a member. And they had a meeting about why it was that I, and Jane was the other person, why we thought that we weren't Black. And I heard that, and I said, I don't not think I'm Black. I just hadn't thought about it. And so that whole process that happened my freshman year really impacted how I thought about myself, the things I learned, the experiences I had. Right before I graduated, I did a job at a place called the Massachusetts Commission Against Discrimination. I'm not sure why, it just spoke to me. I took that job. And working with the lawyers there and hearing the stories of the people they were representing who were discriminated against. And what was so surprising to me about the people who were discriminated against is that they didn't realize it. It was only when a Black person would try to rent an apartment and then a white person would rent the apartment, the Black person was told it wasn't available, the white person was given the apartment. That's when I started realizing how racism works, that it doesn't have to be the actual racist bigot. It can happen with a smiling face, and you can lose opportunities in that way. But I knew I had a goal, right? I wanted to be a civil rights lawyer. I wanted to do the type of work the lawyers did at the place I worked. So went to law school, became a public defender, and then never thought I would be a law professor. And I was asked to teach for 1 semester at a law school, and I was burnt out with my job at that point. So I said yes, worked 1 semester teaching in Chicago and loved it. So they hired me. That's how I started as a law professor, and then moved to many different law schools, ended up at UCI Law School, which is a place I wanted to be ever since it opened its doors, because of the reputation, because of the dean who was there at the time. And when they hired me in 2014, there was no way I could say no. It was my dream place to be. I loved the students, so I never knew that I would like teaching. But then seeing all the students there and being able to have some sort of impact on their lives was so incredibly rewarding, so amazing, right? To help students see things about themselves that they didn't see, right? To encourage them to do things that they didn't think they could do. I just loved it. Right. And then I worked very closely with the dean. I was his second in command, but I never wanted to be a dean. And he kept saying, you should be the dean when I leave. I said, no way, hell would freeze over. There's no world in which that would happen, right? Absolutely not. So it was a shock so he became the dean at Berkeley, and they were looking for the interim dean, and I got a call from the provost, and while I was flying back from a trip, and I just remember this so vividly because I was sitting in the airport lounge, and I answered the phone call from the provost, and he says, congratulations, Song. I'd like to offer you the interim deanship. And I stood up because I was in such shock because it was not at all what I ever wanted to do. And I said no. A few days later, I realized everything that I've done in my career were things I thought I couldn't do and that I thought I didn't want to do. And so one of my students actually said that to me. She said, Song, why would you not just do it? It's the interim. Just see if you like it. It's not permanent. You are in that position to be the person that can empower people within the school and to do the incredible things that they do, right? My job is not to be front and center. My job is to do everything I can to support our students, to support our faculty, to support our senior administrators and staff, so that we as an entire school can do the impactful things for our community. That's what the job is about. So now when I go out and talk to people, it's fine because I'm not doing it for me. I'm doing it for everyone. What makes me lucky is I've always been able to do something I feel passionate about. So I've never had to work, because for me, work is having to do something you don't like, right? Like my mom working the night shift in a rope factory. That's work. I've never had to work. Every single thing, every single job I have loved, which is why I say to my husband, I promise next year, next job, I won't work all the time. I'll enjoy life more. Right? And then I realize that's not true. This is what I do, and I enjoy my life. Sometimes I start down the path of, I wish I had done this, or I wish I had done that. And then but when I really think about it, I'm so thankful for every experience, good and bad, that I've had, because it's why I'm here right now. My name is Song Richardson, and this is my Korean American story.